Hey everyone, Mr. Sujano here, your source for gaming, tech, emulation, and open source news. Let's get started. Alright, we'll kick things off talking about Nintendo 64 emulation, and there's a brand new N64 emulator in development from the folks behind Project 64 Legacy. So a little while back, we talked about Project 64 Legacy and how development on this project had reached its end. In the bottom of the description on their final release, they say although Project 64 Legacy is at an end, we shall be moving forward with our vision geared towards a more accuracy-centered project without restraints of previous boundaries and limitations. And the team's new project is called MiB 64. It's going to be an N64 emulator. If you've been around the emulation scene for a while, you may recognize this name. They are bringing this name back, but it's going to be entirely new code, and from my understanding, it's going to surpass everything they've done before. To be honest with you, I am very excited about this one. They've got a team of talented developers with a great vision, and I can't wait to see what they accomplish. They intend on making this easy to use and high performing. Now, it's worth pointing out that MiB 64 has not released just yet, and as far as I know, there is no specific release date. I wouldn't expect there to be. This is still pretty early on in development, and although the developers are extremely talented, it's going to take them a bit of time. I'll be paying close attention to this one. There is some outdated information out there, and I'll drop a link to it in the description below in the event that you are curious about it. As far as I know, MiB 64 is going to be 100% free and open source, and they do have a Discord link on this page that does bring you to an active Discord, so feel free to check that out. Next up, we're quickly talking about Nintendo 3DS emulation with Lemonade. If you didn't remember, Lemonade is a fork of Citra. And we've got an update here you may be interested in. We already talked about this one, but last week they had their initial Lemonade Android release. And in their description, they say we are still looking for developers, especially for a PC port. Well, it turns out that Gamer64, who's the main person behind this project, may have found his developers. He showcased some screenshots of a PC version of Lemonade. As far as I know, it's still very much a work in progress. There are no public releases, and I'm very curious to see what happens from here. Let me know your thoughts about Lemonade on Android and possibly Lemonade on PC in the comments below. Moving on, and we're talking about Neuralink, and at a super high level, Neuralink is basically a brain computer. It's a chip implanted into your brain, and Noland here is paralyzed from the neck down and has a Neuralink. And he was able to play Mario Kart with his brain. In fairness, Neuralink has had its fair share of bad press, but if that video of Noland playing Mario Kart with his brain was real, this would be a massive win. I am curious as to whether or not they did this using actual Nintendo hardware or using an emulator. And I'm curious as to what Nintendo thinks of it. What do you think of Neuralink? Let me know your thoughts about it in the comments below. And speaking about development, next up we're talking about Megadev. Megadev is a free and open source Sega Mega CD dev kit. Although this project is new to me, it's been around for close to a year now, so thanks to Billy Time Games for the heads up about this one. If you're interested in Sega Mega CD development, I'll drop a link to this GitHub in the description below and feel free to check it out. Next up, we're talking about Virtual Boy emulation on the Nintendo 3DS with Red Viper. And yes, this one has 3D support, and yes, it just got a brand new release. At the time of filming, version 0.9.2 is the latest update. We've got bug fixes, improvements, and brand new features. For example, there's a brand new audio engine allowing for sample playback. 16 megabyte ROMs can now be loaded on the 3DS. You can now navigate the GUI with the 3DS's buttons. They've added zip file support, and you can allow mapping face buttons to the triggers on a new 3DS. This emulator is still a work in progress. For example, some future additions include save state, CirclePad Pro support, and even more. The emulator itself, though, I would argue is in a pretty good position. I mean, they say all officially licensed games are playable. Next up, we're talking about something absolutely crazy. We've talked about some of this stuff in previous videos, but I've never seen it this good. GeekerOne's got a video over on YouTube of a bunch of Windows games running on Android. One of those is GTA 5. Now in his video, Geeker1 does walk through how to set this up. It is done through Mobox. It does require rooting of your phone, and it does require quite a bit of steps. I wouldn't say it's necessarily for the faint of heart, but at the same time, the tutorial is there. One of the games he showcases up and running is Devil May Cry 5 between 50 and 60 frames per second. This is on a Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, and he says it's running at full health with sufficient heat dissipation and more than 10 watts of power consumption. He does recommend locking it in at 30 frames per second. For Grand Theft Auto 5 at 720p resolution on the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 using 12.4 watts, he was able to get 58.3 frames per second. And you can see the differences between Gen 3, Gen 2, Gen 1, and a Snapdragon 888. What's even more interesting is that limiting the frame rate in GTA 5 to just 30 frames per second results in a whole lot less power draw. The Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 is only drawing 4.4 watts. Similar results were expected to be had with something like Devil May Cry 5 as well. Arguably, performance will get better in time when phones get better, and also the translation layer being more optimized. At the same time though, I'd be hesitant to run this on a Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 for a long period of time. I would argue that this would be very hard on the device. And on a side note here, it's worth noting that all of this was possible with flagship Snapdragon CPUs using flagship Adreno GPUs that can take advantage of Mesa Turnip drivers. Mali GPUs cannot. Next up, we're quickly talking about the Mr. FPGA, and if you've got a Mr. and you're interested in N64 emulation, you may want to check out Video Game Esoterica's latest video. I'll drop a link to it in the description below, and I do recommend checking it out. The N64 core got a new turbo core. Some of the games that were previously arguably unplayable are now kind of playable, like Turok 3. I'm both surprised and blown away with N64 emulation on the Mister, and this is definitely something I'll be checking out. Next up, we're quickly talking about some Linux stuff, and if you like to be on the absolute bleeding edge of things, they just pushed out Linux Kernel 6.9 Release Candidate 1. Depending on how new your CPU is, you may see some improvements or you may not. This is still in very early stages of testing. The final release isn't expected for a couple of months. Moving on, and we're still talking about Linux, and this time about Red Hat. It appears that Red Hat is in the process of making some brand new Nvidia open source drivers called Nova, and these are intended to replace Nouveau. Interestingly, Nova is written in Rust. It's still pretty early on in development, but this is great news if you like open source Nvidia drivers. And on a side note, just as a friendly reminder, if you're not on Red Hat but looking for a Nouveau replacement and don't want to use official Nvidia drivers, NVK is available. Next up, we're quickly talking about an unannounced Sega game called Sonic Toys Party. And footage of this game has surfaced online. I'll drop a link to this video in the description below and feel free to check it out. I don't know if it's going to be around for long though. After seeing the trailer, in my opinion, it's basically a Sonic version of Fall Guys. If you've seen the trailer, let me know your thoughts about this one in the comments below. Next up, we're talking about a couple of ROM hacks here. The first one is for Game Boy Wars, and this is an English translation of a game that was never released in English. Game Boy Wars is the precursor to Advance Wars. To be honest with you, I have not tried this one out yet, but I'd imagine that playing this in Japanese without speaking Japanese may be a headache. Now, Game Boy Wars was not the only entry in the series on the Game Boy. There's also Game Boy Wars Turbo and a few others. I'd argue that Game Boy Wars Turbo might be a better game overall. And last up here, we're talking about Dragons Dogma II on Steam, and things are arguably getting from bad to worse about this game. Yesterday, we talked about this game and a lot of the negative feedback that we've been seeing. Well, today, there is even more negative feedback, and it's in regards to Denuvo. You may or may not be aware that Dragons Dogma II does not have an option to restart a game. Capcom is looking into this and looking at implementing this feature in an upcoming patch. And in the meantime, players are just deciding to delete their save files to get around this. However, this is where the whole reported Denuvo kerfuffle kicks in. They're saying each time you delete your save, Denuvo counts it as a new activation. People are bricking their accounts. And Rifter says right in a Steam review, was putting together a compatibility guide for playing the game under Linux in the Steam Deck, which required me to use various Proton versions. Apparently, each of these counted as an individual PC and triggered the Denuvo tamper protection. Now I can't play it all on any of my systems. It appears he was able to resolve his issue by getting a refund. But anyways, that is all I've got for you in this one. Straight to the point, all stuff and one fluff. We talked about a bunch today. Let me know your thoughts about absolutely any of it in the comments below. If you like this video, leave a like. If you didn't like this video, leave a like. Hit that subscribe button, check out my other videos. Don't tempt fate, save your state.